Uyuni. Kwai Nidom Bak, hello my friends. Bakwinon Guzian. Wigodam Namiolan, Pamlon Quick. We meet for the first time, and I'm happy to see you tonight. We gather here today in the homelands of many people. The Abenaki, the Sokoki in particular, the Nipmuc people, the Nanatuk, Norwarak, Moheganuk, and others, their friends and allies, their ancestors. This is their homeland, always has been, and we are still here. So Uli Payo, welcome you. I look forward to our conversation and learning more about you as you learn more about us. I want to offer gratitude for you being here, for my brothers and sisters, for all of our relations. The word for that in the Abenaki language is Ndalamizi. I am grateful. When I say that, Ndalamizi, what I am saying is, I am in the way that I should be. This is my default state. If you're not grateful, you're not on the bus. How could you not be? So, Ndalamizi and Uliuni, thank you.
Thank you, Rich.
Well, I'm really grateful for the welcome, to be welcomed to this land as someone who's not from here. So I want to say thank you for welcoming me to your territory, you and all of the other people who are here, perhaps hiding in the audience from this place. Thank you for hosting us and having us so we can have this conversation. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces in the room. It feels good here. Does it feel good here?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for that too. And I know a lot of you, but for those of you who I don't know, my name is Travana. I just traveled here from the Northlands, from the Wabanaki territory up in Maine and the Penobscot. And it's a real honor to be able to join this conversation, which I've been very excited to have in lots of nooks and crannies and corners for years about integrity in our work. And to be having it here in this auditorium with all of you, with all of these people who I deeply respect, just feels very exciting. And I wonder if anyone else feels that way too. Yeah. So I am just sitting here looking at folks who I can't wait to hear from. And I see my mentor, John Young, over here, who founded the H. Shields Institute and has done a lot of work to bring nature connection alive in the world. I see Saskia Vanderhoef, who is holding a special role as co-founder of Sassafras Earth Education with David Vanderhoef here, who's a Quinawampanoag. And all that you're bringing to this work and this conversation is deeply meaningful. I see Rich Whole Shoe, not half shoe.
Whole shoe.
Rich of the Wooden Shoe, who has mixed heritage as well, European and Mi'kmaq, and works, I wrote it down, with the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs as well. Thank you for doing that. And David Brûlé, who I just got to meet, who I hear is from the Nehantic people of Glen, Connecticut, and works with the Nolumbeka project, which I'm looking forward to learning more about. And like I said, there may be others scattered in the audience, so thank you all. I just want to invite us to listen, all of us, whatever our backgrounds, whatever our identities, whatever brought us here, and whatever questions are in our hearts, to listen with our good ears tonight. We're joining together to do some deep work, and we wanted to name some of what we're assuming and bringing to this conversation. One of the things we're assuming is that we're all in this together, and we're excited about nature connection, outdoor education, and reconnecting humans to the natural world. I feel like that's such a deeply important thing that we're all doing, that brings us together, and that it is necessary in the times that we're living in right now to look at what's happening in the grief of the world with this lens. And so I'm naming that that's something that we're assuming that there's some shared thinking. So please join me in that. Also, we've been starting to really chew on the deep knowledge that this work that we're doing, most of us, around nature connection, mentoring, and cultural repair, we might call it, and cultural regeneration and ancestral recovery. Most of that work was shown to us and was led the way by Indigenous people and was in fact appropriated from Indigenous cultures in these instances. And some of that was with consent and with generous sharing, some of it was just straight up theft. And we're trying to figure out now what to do with this when we have this mess, this mix of this beauty that's happening in the world and its impacts that's being built on this legacy of harm. And that's true across a lot of aspects of our world right now, not just in this area. So we're doing what we can to do our part to address that. And for me, as a settler person, a colonial heritage person, I'm aware of the fact that I'm digging into those little gems of my own cultural heritage that I can find and remember to regenerate, and the deep knowledge of the reparation that is needed. And so I just want to remember always that I, myself, Travana, and also the work that I'm doing in Nature Connection is operating from a place of privilege and is operating on stolen land, and that asks me to step into a deep level of responsibility in this work. So I want to invite all of you into that responsibility, into that holding, that awareness right now, as we are given the opportunity to listen and participate in a dialogue around what this work, what this means. And just to name that, especially for non-Native people, there's a lot of silencing of Native voices and a lot of space for non-Native voices in our culture. And our intention this evening is to create space for Native voices and just to listen. And that we're inviting you and those of you who are non-Native who are here into a space of holding and just deep reflection on all of that. So I want to just let you know that so many emotions may come up and that I'm very excited to process those emotions with you. So if you want to contact me and follow up and tend to this grief, then that would be wonderful. We're not going to just download all of that on our native hosts tonight. So with that place, from that place of respectful holding and sharing in these deep questions, I want to turn it over to Saskia for the next piece. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here for this conversation tonight.
I'd like it if you would also stand. John and I are going to speak a condolence for the people here that, especially those of you that identify as Native or as people of color or any otherwise oppressed by white people. I'm using a little cheat sheet because these are not easy words. I came to this continent about 20 years ago, and I am half from the Netherlands and I am half Frisian, which is one of the last remaining original peoples in the northwest of Europe. My Dutch ancestors all participated in theft and plunder of land all over the world, specifically in Indonesia, in South Africa, and all over the Americas, including the Caribbean. My ancestors participated in the mass killing and the dislocation of indigenous people, especially on this continent, and in trading enslaved people from the African continent. I personally have benefited from those acts of colonization, and I acknowledge the many cases that I have accepted these benefits and that I have turned away from the fact that these benefits were unearned by me, and that enormous harm was done to create them. Therefore, today I want to acknowledge and offer my sincere condolences for the following: the destruction and the plunder of the indigenous people all over the world, the murder and plunder of Native people on this continent, the ongoing destruction of Native culture and communities, and the taking of tribal territories, and especially the ones that Rich formerly mentioned, including the Pakwantag, who were decimated. The betrayal of Native treaties, especially coming from a Dutch person, between our people and the Ganyangahaga. The separation of Native families and the removal of Native children, and the psychological harm that was caused by this and the impact on generations and families to come. And the ongoing impoverishment of tribal and indigenous communities and the ongoing destruction of native land, our mother, the earth. And the environmental destruction of tribal water sources. And also for my own personal contribution to environmental destruction, pollution, and habitat loss on Earth and all the ecosystems that surround me. The destruction of animals and plants that live on Earth. The destruction of people and their communities and their suffering, of impoverishment and conflict that resulted from colonialism. And lastly, the impact that we humans, especially white humans, have beyond Earth and our lack of respect for all extraterrestrial beings.
I join Saskia in that same sentiment, as most of my ancestry comes from Europe as well. And I know certainly the English heritage that's in my veins has had a lot of influence around the world in that same colonial way, that I too want to recognize that my ancestors in the different European lineages have had a hand in the very things that Saskia has just named. And I too wish to speak out with my most heartfelt commitment to wanting to set things right. As I was speaking to David earlier outside, we were talking about our intention. And now that we live on this earth in 2019, in May, here we stand in this beautiful country here, this countryside, together, holding in our minds and hearts the well-being of our planet and all of its beings, which includes the humans, but all the other beings as well. And we really need to acknowledge what's happened in the past. And we need to stand in that, feel that, and we need to show up with love for each other, and especially for our Native brothers and sisters here on this land that we occupy. And that we need to welcome the right steps forward and find a way to walk together, because we need to collaborate now for the little children all over this earth that need us to get it together quickly, because our window is short. I think we all know that and feel that, but we can all work together, feel our pain, be with it, love each other, and move forward. And with that, I offer my condolences also to my Native brothers here, to the extended Native communities around this world.
Can we have a moment of silence maybe before we continue?
Thank you, Saskia, John. Let's take a seat. So with the gratitude and introductions and the condolence, the recognition of the people that came before us, that walked this land, that are no longer here, weren't able to produce their ancestors because they were killed in the many forms that they were. I want to begin by recognizing that, recognizing the historic trauma that was brought upon the people here, that lived here for thousands and thousands of years in harmony with the earth, in harmony with their communities. And sure, they had conflicts, but they were able to resolve the conflicts without destroying the earth or completely destroying one another. And that historic trauma lives on in me, lives on in Native people wherever they are, passed down through the mothers. And it took me at least 50 years to understand that and to be able to give that depression, that not knowing who I am and being afraid all of the time in my heart, not on the outside, but in my heart. It took me a long time to figure out why that is. Through the stories that I heard, and through the people who spoke and wrote the books, like Lisa Brooks, bringing history in your face. Real history, true history. Not this fairy tale that I was taught in school. So that was the beginning. That was a beginning place for me to start, to realize why all of this was happening, not just to me, but all throughout Indian country, wherever I went. Seeing it, seeing the patterns, looking at the statistics, but not having a place for those statistics to go away. They're still there, in black and white. You can read about it. It's not an easy read, but it's real. Hopefully tonight we'll be able to come to a little bit more of an understanding where Native people are, who they are. Maybe take it a step further. By you understanding maybe even reaching out, not being afraid to apologize, or say even hello, and to be humble. Walking on the blood of my people. And I'm wondering if, Mitch, would you have a word about historic trauma that you would like to share?
Yes, thank you. And David
David,
can share with that. Where we gather here today, what is Greenfield, immediately adjacent to the Kitsipantuk, the Great Falls, and the Quinnetuk and the Connecticut River, there was a massacre that took place there, very close by. May 19th, 1676, part of what we call King Philip's War in the history books. Upwards of 300 Native people were slaughtered there at dawn in their wigwams. So we come together at a place where it's very real, it's in our faces. Those effects continue. That place is called Turner's Falls now, named after the man who led the massacre. There's some justice for you, or lack thereof. We want to talk about that. I'm sure we're here to talk about decolonization. That's the source of this trauma. We want to move away from that. We want to look for balance. Balance is an operative concept. We've been out of balance for a really long time, and it shows in the condition of not only the Native people, but they're the canary in the coal mine, as a friend of mine says. What's going on all around us globally is all part of that same process. David can shed a little bit of light with you folks about the immediacy of that in this place through the work that he's involved in, if you want to.
Sure. Really honored to be here. Following Rich's lead, I can tell a brief story about what I've been involved in with Rich and 4 other allied tribes. Essentially, in 2013, we felt there was some momentum in that place called Turner's Falls. As Rich mentioned, the person who led the attack on the non-combatants at the falls died in that attack eventually, within a few hours. However, someone somewhere decided that they should call that site Turner's Falls, in spite of the fact that 400 indigenous people from the Abenaki, the Narragansett, the Wampanoag, Pennacook, and Nipmuc peoples died there. It was a very traumatic place in the sense that some of our Wampanoag friends who traveled along Route 2 near that site, every time going by there from the North Adams State Teachers College in the days when that existed as such, down to the island, had to go along Route 2 and felt really overcome and overwhelmed by horrific, dark spirits that were not settled, had not been able to complete their journey, and they were still in torment. It was really pretty awful for these people. In the study that began 5 years ago, we fought very hard for the National Park Service, who was funding the study, to include Native voices. And one of the criticisms of an earlier study done at the about the Mystic Fort massacre of the Pequots was that a non-tribal writer, historian, pretty much took all the Native stories and homogenized that. So we said this is not going to happen with this particular study of that awful event in 1676. And so 4 of the tribes that were working with the 5 towns, historical commissioners, each wrote their own version of what they felt happened, or at least what was remembered in the tribe, but also the impact. Incredibly moving, speaking of the trauma. The Nipmuc person, David Tallpine White and Cheryl Tony Hawley wrote of the trauma, and they interviewed tribal people to find out what, if anything, they knew or what they felt. And one of the chapters in their narrative started out with, "We forgot. We didn't want to, but we forgot." In other words, the trauma was incredible. The people who were interviewed were saying, we have had to live below the radar all the time. We would have been better off if we were black and not Nipmucs. That's a powerful statement coming from the Nipmuc elder. Elizabeth Perry, James Perry, who was the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer representing the Aquinnah Wampanoag, gave us hope in her narrative of 20 pages. There's a lot that had to come out for her, and what came out was a little bit more optimistic in the sense that she felt that if the non-tribal people, the townspeople of the area, the region, were meeting at the table with tribal people, that was the beginning of healing. And I think that is a really important step in this study that we undertook and is ongoing. There are tons of stories related to this particular study. The trauma that happened on May 19, 1676. According to Doug Harris of the Narragansett Indian tribe, feels that he stated in our Day of Remembrance, we have one. We commemorate the people who were victims of that massacre every Saturday that's closest to the May 19th. This year it was May 18th, and we had over 80 people there, including tribal representatives and non-tribal people. But what Doug Harris had to say was, the spirits now, he felt, have been released. They can continue their journey. They had been in torment there for all this time, but with the presence of the tribal medicine man coming to an agreement with the town of Montague in a reconciliation ceremony, that was a tremendous step in relieving that trauma that, as you might know, was multi-generational trauma. To this day, people, even if they don't know why they are feeling that way, that events back in the 1600s have caused this, they still feel it. So Doug Harris basically said that he felt that now the spirits were able to continue their journey to the southwest. And now it was time for those of us who are here to begin the work of healing and helping not only the tribal people, but also the non-tribal white European descendants And so that's perhaps more than what Rich had in mind when I again began to speak, but that's really a small capsule of what has been going on. It's been an absolutely moving experience. All kinds of historical perspectives have been revealed. The history about that particular day and that particular war were written by white observers within a few months or years, or based on hearsay. We have the native perspective, and we also have a tremendous amount of archaeology that is bringing to light that things didn't quite happen the way those guys said it did back in 1676. So I can talk to you about that if anybody is interested at some time, but I could go on for quite a while. That's my little aside on that trauma.
Thank you very much for that, David. That's really, really pertinent, really interesting, really necessary for us to understand. And just one more little thing, and then we'll move on, that I feel, and that I would invite you to have a thought on, is that the statistic is that 95% of the indigenous natives along the eastern seaboard of Turtle Island were wiped out. We are 5%. We are ancestors of the 5% that remained. So that project that David was just talking about, small scale like that, but giving such relief and acknowledgement, in my mind, should happen all over, for us to begin to feel human again, and not dwell in the place of shadows. So thank you for that. So we're going to move on to decolonization. What is it to me? What is it to you? Why is it important right now for natives to begin that process of decolonization versus remaining status quo? I want to read you a little piece from my friend Michael Yellowbird and Arikara and Adat from North Dakota, formerly professor of sociology of the University of North Dakota, just took a job in Canada, heading up, being the dean of Indigenous studies up there. He's written several books, really knowledgeable, good person, and he says, besides affecting Native people through the horrendous trauma inflicted, what makes it worse, that decades later, the colonization of natives continues. Natives are not in control of their own lives, and they do not receive the same protection from the United States government, since Native American tribes are the only people in the U.S. who are under what is called plenary power. That means absolute power to take action with no limitations toward Native people. without notice, without so much as a phone call letting them know what's happening. That means that colonialization takes root at a very deep level, and this long-term trauma results in negativity, hyper-alertness, as if you are in constant danger. It contributes to all kinds of diseases and gets passed on genetically from the time babies are in the womb. They are being prepared for a hostile world. So that is what the system has made and put into practice for all of the indigenous people around the United States. So how do we confront that? How do we get beyond that? How do we get beyond the colonialization, the hypnotism that has bestowed, not only natives, but also, I'm assuming some of you that have just been guided along into this system of the United States that they have. What do we do about that? What happens in the long term is that people learn how to deal with that oppression. They cope and live with things as they are. They accept the situation and get comfortable and become numb to it. Colonialization becomes normal. This happens unconscious, and the result is that people become numb and depressed. They don't think about the oppression anymore. And to me, Michael Yellowbird, that is colonialization. And I'll continue. So I developed this term called neuro-decolonization. The first part refers to neurons, specialized cells that are constantly talking to ourselves. All about what we eat, how we feel, how much we sleep, and so on. The decolonization part refers to all the different activities we can do to weaken the effects of colonialism. We can self-facilitate resistance opportunities. We can learn language and relearn customs. We can begin to eat like our ancestors, interact with animals and everything that is around us in nature, and engage in traditional practices. What many people do not know is that indigenous people had all sorts of mindfulness practices. There were daily practices, ceremonies, rites of passage, many different forms of prayers and song, some lasting for hours, some lasting for days. We know from neuroscience that long-term prayer, for example, a monk or a nun that is in prayer for several hours, that it changes the brain. What happens if I am praying for a long time? My brain's intellectual and spatial functions begin to slow down and stop functioning. And the distance, for instance, between me and the tree completely disappears. I am the tree is me. That to me is decolonization. So that's a beginning, I think. That's somewhere where we can start thinking about decolonizing our minds and sharing information that we can use as Native people to grasp onto, to try to make an understanding with. another question that I have, how can we break the cycle of assimilation? I don't know how many of you know about the taking of children, putting them in schools where they would say that save the man, kill the Indian, save the man. What a horrendous, horrendous thought. I've known people who have gone through that system, how they've turned out, and the difficulty that they have had. We now can, begin to share in the practices that we do in outdoor education to remedy some of that disorientation. Okay. Would either of you like to speak on anything about decolonization?
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. So maybe this is stating the obvious, but I just have to say it because I don't like to assume. It's not a good idea. Decolonization is not something that happened in 1676. It's not something that happened in 1836, whatever date you want to pick. You're probably familiar with this idea. It's a structure. It's not a point in time. It continues. That's obvious if you look around you. And that's why we need to look at this. Here in New England, that process has been going on for a very, very long time. It has a real deep history. It's deeply entrenched to the point that, for example, people are not aware that there is a Native presence here. It is so under the radar. Some of our Western brothers and sisters, I heard a Lakota man say a couple of years ago, there's no Indians in New England. He believes that too. Colonization is something that has happened to Native people and non-Native people. The benefit tends to fall toward one side. There's where the lack of balance is. But it's not true, and that's why we need to examine it. We need to look at that. There are Native people here. They look like everyone else. They're human beings. And they have the same wants and needs and emotions as everyone else, and that's just a basic human thing. The Abenaki people, their homelands were, if you're not familiar with them, very broad. The Western Abenaki people, and I'm switching back and forth because these are various forms of the same word. Their homelands ran from here in the northern Massachusetts area all the way up through Vermont, across New Hampshire, southern Maine, and into Quebec to the St. Lawrence. That's a lot of territory. People in New England are very unfamiliar with the Abenaki people because our heritage is primarily English settler. The Abenaki people traditionally aligned with the French to the north, and so they were not only persona non grata, but they were not on the records. Nobody knew. Lisa's been recovering this work. It's a kind of a vast black hole, so to speak, in the conventional historical record north of Massachusetts. It's not actually. If you go to the right places and you poke around, you can find the evidence. It's right there in front of your face. but written out of history and omitted. And so the work of colonization has been going on here for a really long time, and we have a lot of work to counter that. The Abenaki people in Vermont have only been recognized by the Vermont government as its indigenous people for 6 years. The state of Vermont, under its wonderful liberal governor, Howard Dean, spent $1 million of taxpayers' money fighting recognition. And eventually, the narrative started to change, and in 2010, recognition took place on a state level. That's a colonized system, though. It doesn't really matter. If you know who you are, you know who you are. But we seize on these little scraps of federal recognition, state recognition, being a member of a recognized tribe. It's really, really hard to dig down and get past that. How do you get past that? As they say, it's the water we swim in. It's all we know. And these conversations are only going to be starting tonight. They're going to go on for a really long time. If we're here together to talk about the same thing, we have a chance at it. So that's why we're here. Thank you. That's all I have to say right now.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. This is a conversation that needs to be had, and it's going to be a long one and difficult one. And we can't turn the clock back. We are all here together. We got to figure this out, or it's going to end poorly. I myself personally think it is going to end poorly. I really do. However, that does not relieve me of my responsibility to do the right thing. I know what's right. We have our essential teachings, our wisdom. We know what to do, and we have to do it. That's what being a good person is, I think. You can define it as I've heard. I've been asked, what's your purpose in life? What's the best thing anyone can do? And I would answer that, to be a good ancestor. We are the product of everyone that has come before, and everything that has come before, and everything that will come after us will be a product of us. That's serious responsibility. It is incumbent upon us. Pay attention. Right? Let's figure this out. Let's work on it. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. This has been done for thousands of years. And yes, human beings have frailties. It's not all, glitter and unicorns. But some things are better than others, and we need to move toward balance, and we're out of balance. So that's the direction. The work that I do with the Abenaki people in Vermont is starting from ground zero, just trying to raise awareness. The Vermont history books literally taught in their books until around 1970 or so. It said, no Native people ever lived here. That's pretty bald-faced. That's what it was taught. They passed through hunting and fishing, or going to the casinos in Connecticut, whatever they were doing. But they didn't live here. And when you paint the picture that way, that allows you to then take what belongs to no one else. But it's not true. It's lies. And that's pretty obvious now. Pretty obvious. But most people don't know that still. Change comes very slowly. You folks are sort of on the front lines there. You're reaching the younger generations. You're passing on some of this knowledge that has been lost. The disconnect. Like colonization is the process of taking something that belongs to someone else for yourself. That's what colonization is. And what you're doing is you're separating that. You're breaking the bonds. I'll take that, thank you very much. What we need to do is to reconnect. We need to restore those bonds. And that's what decolonization is about. But it's serious business. It's hard.
Thank you.
I can tell you a couple of stories about where I'm coming from. Like a lot of you have mixed heritage. I've got all kinds of strands running through my DNA going back. But I'm a fossil. I'm extinct. Officially extinct, declared extinct by the state of Connecticut. The Nehantic tribe does not exist, stopped existing about 100 years ago. Nobody checked with my grandfather or grandmother or my great-grandfather to find out whether they were extinct and still alive and well, but we were declared that. Talk about colonization. So I was brought up as French and Irish. That whole part, even in my immediate family, that whole part of the indigenous background was totally suppressed. Couldn't know about it, you know. And when it started leaking out, my mother said, I don't want you to know about that. I don't want you to write about that. I didn't know those people. So that is how deep that went. And I, of course, said, there's no way I'm gonna like just let it go. So it's a funny story. Not so funny, but I'm optimistic. I'm a buoyant person, so I'm thinking positive. So anyway, I was, let's see. One day I decided to Google the East Lyme Historical Society because my people came from East Lyme. Crescent Beach, I don't know if you've ever been down that way. There's actually a town called Nehantic right on Long Island Shore. And so I said, okay, I've heard about the East Lyme Historical Society. I Googled them, and what pops up but a lecture saying, what happened to the Nehantics? So I said, oh, you know, wow, unbelievable. And I missed it like about 2 days. So I called up the anthropologist who was delivering the lecture, and I could hear the surprise on the other end of the line. I'm sure he felt kind of like one of those anthropologists going through the Amazon and discovering, you know, a living person, tribe, fossil or something. And so I said, yeah, I descended from this line, and I know where I am, and last time I checked, I was here. And so we got together, and it turned out that there were 6, 7 other people just like me that started coming out of the woodwork who had been basically denied their existence, their identity. Everything was gone. Assimilation, talk about that. So we started getting together. What had occurred was that on this reservation of Black Point, you can still go there, but now it's loaded with summer homes. My ancestor farmed about 100 acres on that reservation. And as time went on, it was harder and harder to make a living on the reservation. So seasonally, this is a very typical pattern in southern New England tribes and northern New England as well. People drifted away and then came back and drifted away. And before long, the permanent number of families were about 10. So the railroad people started saying, this would be great, and you can still see this damn railroad runs right through the old reservation. And so the reservation, the railroad people thought it would be great to have a nice railroad running from New York City to Newport, right along the beach, right along the shore. So they kind of talked the town into officials and the state officials into declaring my people extinct. Of course, we were up in over in New London or up in Hartford trying to make a living. Eventually, my ancestors moved from Hartford right up the valley and settled in Deerfield, and then over to where I'm living now. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are so many examples of peoples whose existence has been denied, whose identity has been suppressed, even into the people like my own parents who were in denial. So what occurred was my ancestors from Black Point, Crescent Beach, Nehantic, East Lyme, were bought out. The last families were there, and the railroad people said, we'll give you some money if you get off the land because we want to run a railroad through here. The people who were remaining said, okay, we'll take your money, but we want you to preserve our cemetery in perpetuity. They said, sure, we'll sign for that. Here's the money, you leave, your cemetery is protected. And that lasted about 10 years. A hotel concern decided they would like to have a hotel overlooking the beach. And so they didn't want to be bothered by a couple of stones sticking up right in front of their veranda. So they removed them, took them over to the Yankee cemetery. Those who they thought were Christian, where their bones were removed, tossed into a wagon and dumped over into the Yankee cemetery. And everything else was obliterated. However, so there was no deed to this day. So we've got a few aces up our sleeve here. So to this day, people are not allowed. There are cabins there, rather summer resort homes, pretty fancy in a lot of places. I find it really ironic that it's named Columbus Avenue now, and that it has American flags in every one of these little enclaves and pink flamingos on the lawn and all that. But they were not allowed to have cellars for good reason, because there's several hundred years, if not more, of human remains there. So there had to be a sewer project along Columbus Avenue. They turned up a number of human beings, human remains, and an anthropologist who became a very good friend was called in, and he started documenting what he was finding. And so at this stage, another anthropologist hired by the state came in and said, no, there's nothing really here. And so the sewer project went through, the ground was covered up, and that was the end of it. But the people that we have rejoined together, we have discovered that we have Nehantic ancestors from 8 or 9 states. I could go on about New England Indian history, but there was a movement at some point with Samson Occam to go to get Indian people, whoever wanted to get out away from white people, to go up to the Oneida Reservation called Brothertown. So Mohegans, Nipmucks, Narragansetts, Nehantics, Schaghticoke, the Quinnipiac people went up there, and then eventually went over to Wisconsin. So there's all kinds of things that people were feeling and being, let's say, victimized about this. So when I rediscovered all of this, of course I wanted to reclaim it. I'm proud of the Irish part and the French part, but I want the native part as well. I claim it all. So that's where I'm at right now. And I met people like Rich and Roger Longto, David White of the Nipmucks, Cheryl Tony Hawley of the Nipmuc Nation. And I was made to feel very welcome. And I got drawn into this organization called the Nolumbeka Project. And it was one of those things where somebody said, you really should be part of what we're doing. And I said, sure. Before long, they made me chairman. And you know how that's like. So one of our things, and I want to tie this in and finish up with at least my little part, one of the things that we are doing, Rich and I were at a school, Mohawk Trail Regional School, speaking to 40 teachers this afternoon, just before coming here. And Rich brought up a very important thing, which is, and he reiterated that it starts here. So what we have been doing, the Nolumbeka people, is we have been invited into the schools to deal with the young people, with middle schoolers. And so this is where we are putting a lot of our energies. we found ways and projects to get kids involved. One of them is involved with the pollinator project. So talk about a perfect joining. We have projects involving plantings for pollinators, for bees, butterflies, pollinating insects, and we have projects where the kids can do things. So you've got Indigenous storyteller coming in to relate nature and the whole concept of reciprocity and sustainability, while these kids are working on seed projects that they later will take out into their community and place in landscapes that need help to help the pollinators. So those are the, I mean, I'm optimistic, as I said, those are the types of things we're working on a small level at decolonizing this whole concept. Kids are listening. They listen to stories, they like doing things with their hands, and the community loves it because they are out there, and it's almost non-political, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, that's my contribution for right now, but that's where I'm coming from, and that's the new kind of groove, kind of situation, calling that I've gotten into in this part of my life.
Thank you, David. Thank you. I'd like to begin the conversation about cultural appropriation.
Can I say something before we move on?
Absolutely.
You know, both of your sharing just now really reminded me of the importance of decolonization for all of us. And I think that many people here, including myself, are outdoor educators or somehow connected to outdoor education, either maybe through their families or through their children. And so often when we're having these type of conversations, we come up against, well, there's no native people in our area. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that before. You just illustrated that, you know, very, very poignantly, so to speak. And I think that one of the ways that we as people can help decolonize, I as a white person can help decolonize, and this can happen in my organization, but it also just can happen at home, is just by really doing the homework and by really researching and by making sure that I look past that statement of, yeah, well, there's no native people in my area, I can't find them. And yeah, we may have to look a little bit harder, and it may not be very comfortable. No, may not. It's not going to be comfortable. But like your story so beautifully illustrates that there probably are native people in your area. And that each of us has the responsibility to begin that process, process of truth telling. And then from there, once we start there, you know, let's extend the conversation even further, because we haven't even began to talk about people of color and how the notion, how so many things, you know, around how we treat one another need to be decolonized in that sense just as much. And I think that I just wanted to point out that I really feel that especially outdoor educators have such a big responsibility that we, and later on we'll talk a little bit after you'll have a chance also to chime in, John, as to like how we can do that. But what really speaks to me is like, I understand the conversation is called, that we're having tonight, is called Decolonizing Outdoor Education. You may be wondering, when are we going to talk about outdoor education? Well, we're getting there. But the reason why we can't talk about it is because all the shit that happened. This is decolonizing outdoor education. This is our homework.
Thank you. That's, okay. Thank you. That's right. So with the, I realize that we could take these conversations up on each one of these topics and spend days on it and really take a deep dive in. But tonight, we can, and I'd like to get to, other thing, but I wanted to really start from the beginning so that you have, a good foundation to build your understanding with. So, cultural appropriation and outdoor education, nature connection mentoring is what I'd like to move on to. And I'd like for you to begin that conversation, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind, but I actually would, if you don't mind, I would really like to hear from John before we start kind of like breaking things down. I would really like it if we could build things up a little bit in terms of like, why are you so involved in the work that you do, John? Like, why is nature connection so vital at this point in history? And I understand that this it's not the same thing, but that outdoor education at large has a very similar responsibility. But I think that specifically nature connection mentoring and as an approach and the way that you have described and developed the approach together with the efforts of many of us that are sitting here and that I'm recognizing tonight. Is that can you speak to that, the importance of that deep connection between people and nature and people and people?
No.
Well, then you're up.
And you've got 3 minutes.
Yeah, 3 minutes. That's what I was waiting for right there. Looking at that for 40 years, I think now. So I am thinking about how I can boil it down. I was born in Red Bank, New Jersey, on the Navesink River, which is an estuary, and it was the home of the Lenni Lenape people. And it was many years before I met a Lenni Lenape person, and 19 years actually. I met some wonderful people in 1979 up in Asbury, New Jersey. But before that, I was doing interpretive work for Monmouth County Park System around Lenni Lenape history there. But there was not really any there wasn't very much role modeling in suburban New Jersey for nature connection. You know what I'm saying? I know in the room there's a few of you. Walker, George, who else is from New Jersey? Yeah. So it wasn't exactly like we were surrounded by people who were like loving Mother Earth. And really when anybody was getting close to that path, what was modeled instead was, when will you grow up and join the real world? And I remember I won that argument just with my dad when I said, which real world are you talking about? The stars, the sun, the moon, the trees, the rivers, the fish, the birds. Is that the real world you're talking about? And then he said, I know you're right, Jonathan. But listen to this. He said, people who speak like you get crucified. And I don't want to see that happen to you, my son. So even stepping up for the Mother Earth, in that neighborhood was socially, emotionally dangerous, if you will, because there was an agenda, right? And I fell in love with the earth a long time ago because I had a very clever grandmother from Ireland who still had some tricks up her sleeve, that's for sure. And she really knew how to work with the children and get them really connected to the land. And the same thing with my great aunt from Poland. She came over on the boat when she was a little girl. She had a deep connection to the land. And so I had these beautiful elder grandmas that really connected me. But it was, of course, I'm sure you all know that when I was 10, I met a man on the street corner who himself had been mentored by an enigma of a person who his identity has been hidden, but who is from some Apache-related lineage. And that's why that book sits on that table right there. Because people would never, by accident, discover bird language. It would not happen. You could spend all your life outside walking around and you would never figure it out. And I didn't figure it out because I'm smart. I didn't even figure it out. What happened was my mentor asked me lots of questions because his mentor asked him lots of questions. And it takes more than your lifetime to discover by accident the kinds of things that are in the knowledge of bird language. I went into the Kalahari and I interviewed some of our ancient ancestors. For many of us in this room, we're descended from the San people. And the San people have extraordinary knowledge of bird language. It's just unbelievable how much they know. But it does not pass down unless someone mentors somebody in it. It won't pass down by itself. It's like thousands of years of knowledge compressed into the right questions to be asked of the children. It's the only reason that book sits on that table. Not because I figured it out, but because my mentor had questions asked of him that go back to the beginning of time, really. Right? So, in your face right here, is that cultural appropriation or not? I don't know. It's a really hard question to answer. I was a little kid up the street from a guy up the street who asked me questions. But I really want to be sensitive to it. And the thing I want to know is, okay, so I just came off a bird language weekend in California, so I'm a little buzzed on bird language right now. And we're going to go and have another one at Roe in a couple of days, and we're going to immerse ourselves in more bird language. So it's just kind of like everywhere right now for me. And it's in the room because everything you're talking about is bird language too. It's like, how do we affect each other? How do the concentric rings of the waves of our energy move through time and space and affect all of us? Because it isn't just about a raven upsetting a robin. You know what I mean? Are you feeling that? So bear with me. I was talking to Jennifer Brzee, who is working now at Ravenwood Outdoor Education Center out in Montana. And I got the opportunity to work with Jennifer for many years, and we were co-leading a mentoring course on tracking in bird language. And she got quite good at bird language. And she spent a lot of time sitting in her sit spot, if you will, just sitting in her little urban sit spot in Oakland, having amazing experiences there with birds and people. And I said to her recently, we were co-leading a webinar online, and I said to her, Jen, what's your reflection on bird language? And out of her mouth came, it's the fastest route to belonging, without hesitating. It's the fastest route to belonging. And I think one of the things that we discover in a lot of the social survey work that I've been involved with, Mark Maury over here, hi Mark, glad you're here, where we were working with a man named Peter Schlenska, who was sort of reverse engineering 27 years of the Art of Mentoring Network's efforts. And one of the things that we were looking at when we were asking lots of questions of people was, so many people go outside, but they don't feel like they belong. They go for hikes in the woods, but they feel like intruders. They know they love nature, but they're not sure how to fit in, or do they belong, or should they even be there? Right? This is a common feeling among modern people. And when Jen says the fastest route to belonging, she's speaking about the journey to feeling like someone who doesn't belong on the earth to someone who knows they're part of it. Because when you understand bird language, you understand you're in a conversation. You're not separate from it. You cannot be. You can't be. And if you leave here tonight and you think that you somehow are, well, hey, the earth is the earth and nature is nature, and I'm just a person who's walking through, but I'm not really part of it. Well, guess what? The birds are saying that about you. They're saying exactly that. And I would say to you, why not have them say something else about you? You can choose to be part of it. You can be part of the conversation, and if you're part of the conversation, you're starting the decolonizing process. The neuro, what did you call it?
Neurodecolonization.
Neurodecolonization. Nature connection is neurodecolonization. They are. So the more I study these two things, the more I realize they're saying the same exact thing. And the thing that I now see, which is something that in 1979, when I saw the bulldozers take down the forest that I had been sitting in as my sit spot for 9 years, I made a pledge to myself right then and there that I was going to do something. And I was going to figure out how to get the people that were so disconnected. You know, if I can say, I don't belong here, I'm not part of it, then I can also say, I can destroy it and it doesn't hurt. And I can destroy land, I can destroy people, I can destroy myself. Because I'm disconnected from me, from the other people, from nature. And I kept thinking to myself, at the age of 19, how can I get these people around me who can do things without feeling or without thought that's harmful to the life systems that I care so much about. I watched the box turtles go extinct in my area. I watched many kinds of snakes go extinct in my area. I watched warblers not come back in the spring anymore. The voices that I got to know and was familiar with, they all left. There was very few things left. And I felt like the tide of life was receding. And that felt really urgent to me. And I thought the only way we're going to get the tide of life to come back is to get the people back in collaboration with the tide of life. And if we're going to get them back in collaboration with the tide of life, we're going to have to connect them back to life. And if we're going to connect them back to life, we should really go talk to the people who know how to connect people back to life and do it in every generation and have been for thousands of years. Because maybe they got a few tricks up their sleeve. So I started talking to different indigenous and traditional people in different parts of the world, and I kept finding similar patterns. And as I looked at those patterns, I said, these patterns are completely missing from the way Western people interact with nature. They go out there and they talk about it with a lot of big words, but they don't do these things. These things seem important for connection. So I started looking at the things that helped restore connection, and I started looking at them as practices that affected the way the nervous system worked in a human being to encourage the feeling of belonging. And I don't see these paths as different. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do. You know, I was recently talking to an elder in traditional indigenous territory north of the Great Lakes. And I won't say his name because I don't have permission to say his name, but I'll just tell you what he said to me. He said, for many generations, he said, our people have never had a problem interpreting the great law of peace. We've all understand it with a unified mind. But in the last 2 and 3 generations, the people have lost their connection to the earth, and now they're arguing over the meaning of the great law. And that, in my childhood, growing up with the elders I grew up with, I can't imagine. I couldn't imagine, nobody could have imagined that we would ever reach a place where we would no longer understand the great law for what it was. And he said, I think it has to do with the fact that my elders told me that we don't learn the great law from the great law, we learn it from the trees, from the birds, from the animals, from the moon, from the sun, from the stars. And he said, now I realize as a boy, I grew up with those relationships, but the very next generation didn't, and the next generation didn't, and the next generation didn't even more. And he said, is there anything that you can recommend that would get them back, the children back quickly into the relationships before it gets any worse? And so I know that reciprocity for me now is all that I've learned from all the places I've been all over this planet. I need to reinvest them and help my Native brothers and sisters as well as anyone who is willing to go on a journey of reconnecting. Because it turns out, and this is my opinion after 40 years, that we cannot connect to nature if we don't connect to ourselves. We cannot connect to ourselves if we don't connect to one another as human beings. Like, we need all three of those connections. They feed one another in a positive, virtual feedback loop. Self, other humans, natural world. You'll connect better to yourself with a connection to nature. You'll connect better to people with a connection to nature, and vice versa. And you won't go any further on your nature connection journey than your peer and family group supports you. So if your family's not connected to nature, they're going to keep you from connecting to nature, or they're going to try to stop you and say, when are you going to grow up and join the real world? And that's historical trauma coming through European settlers. From their moments of colonialization about 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, a lot of stuff happened 2,000 years ago over in England and all Europe with the Roman Empire expansion, but it goes back further still. But it's like a virus, right? But I do believe that we can collaborate together and create ways, and like what I've amassed, I feel like an electrical engineer for connection. That's what I feel like. I understand how village structures accelerate connection. I understand how family structures accelerate connection. I understand how individual activities can accelerate connection. And I understand how to build models on that and to help influence organizations, schools, communities, families, to help make that happen. And I try to be as generous as I can with the recipe book so that people can do it really quickly, because I think, you know, I share Rich's concern. You know, maybe it's not going to go so well, where the window's closing. But I love the optimism on the other end of the table, and I go back and forth. But never do I not wake up in the morning and put everything I got into this, because I also believe this is a responsibility. You know, this knowledge was passed on to me freely from many different people from all over the world, and we all discussed it as a problem we all wanted to solve together. You know, the project that I'm working on in Botswana right now is with a whole bunch of Botswana people. Some are from Namibia, but basically these are the original inhabitants of that place. They've been there for 60, 70,000 years. And they were the only people there for a long time, but just a couple thousand years ago, people started encroaching on them and pushed them to the brink of existence, and they retreated deeply into the Kalahari. And the Kalahari was so difficult to live in that no one followed them there and left them alone for a few hundred years. But finally caught up with them because pavement and fences and whatever. But some of their relatives were put on what we would call reservations in this country. And as soon as they got on the reservations, things started to go really bad for those people for all the reasons that you've already heard up here. So that's still happening today, because this is a really recent story. It's only a couple decades old. But these other people said, wait a minute, let's just run around the backside of the farms and hide in the woods. You know, and these people are hunter-gatherer nomads, so they don't think anything of it, right? You could say it's a homeless encampment, but what would you call a homeless bushman? Right? They're totally at home there. They get 80% of their food from the plants that they still gather and eat. They still hunt, they still do things, right? But they're not allowed to hunt legally, so they're actually poaching on their ancestral land. But anyway, these people have decided to form an intentional community on the backside of farms between the national park. And they're not in the national park, they're just kind of hiding, working for cash on the backs of farms, but the main thing they're trying to do is keep their culture alive. And they're really invested in helping, try to figure out how to speed up the process by which families can learn. What are tricks mothers can use to connect their children faster? What are tricks grandmothers can use to help the children connect faster? What can uncles do? What can dads do? What can brothers do? What can sisters do? They've got all this knowledge about how to do this, and they're really totally willing. That's the spirit. How can we help each other scale and cause viral spreading of connection on the fastest possible timeline? That's the game I'm playing. and do it in a way that's sensitive and that involves our dear friends up here as well as all over this land, but on all lands, to recognize and respect the Indigenous history and respect the healing processes needed in those places, and make sure that we all play a role together and that we communicate openly about what's needed and how we can be helpful. Because this is not an easy problem to solve, but we got to keep at it. Anyone else feeling that way? I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
I knew you were going to say something very helpful. So now I'm going to chop away at it a little bit.
Please do.
Thank you. So what I want to name right now is that we've heard all these stories about history, and we've heard some truth, and we've heard a beautiful connection story from John about what is a remedy and what is possible. And I stood between those two worlds 20 years ago when I went to my first Art of Mentoring, which is a workshop, in case you don't know, that teaches that model of connection, primarily by white people and for white people. Not because it was designed that way, but because of all the mechanisms that are in place that we've talked about previously, that we are passionately trying to change, but not easy for a whole number of reasons. One being mechanisms of oppression and colonization still happening in our lives every single day. I came there with my tiny little 2-year-old and with my husband David. And before I continue to talk about cultural appropriation in outdoor ed and in nature connection mentoring, I'd love to hear a couple of those impressions of what happened for you in that moment, to kind of bridge that tension, to name that tension.
So, pretty exciting going down with my little girl and my wife to this new opportunity or so that we thought about and so on. So we got there and I guess like nearly immediately we looked around, see what happens. A lot of people, of course we didn't know anybody there and so on and so forth. Well, what do I see is like, well, these white people, they going around smudging people and smudging these areas, and I just kind of just took a breath in and said, oh, well, it's, okay, they're smudging, and I thought, well, you know, isn't that like something that my people do and that I, you know, that I witnessed, and it just didn't, you know, it didn't feel quite right, really. I mean, they, you know, they were doing it with a feather and so on and so forth. So I said, okay, that's fine. And then I was hearing some drumming, and I said, well, I get to see some native people. You know, because I really felt that this was a real, like, cool, like, project, and that, you know, hearing the drumming and so on and so forth, I said, now we're going to get into some, you know, we're going to see some native people and be able to converse and to join in and so on. But there weren't any native people. There was one. Uncle Paul was there, and I was just so elated to see him and to make that connection. But the feeling that I got I didn't name it, I couldn't name it at the time, but when I think back at it, the cultural appropriation that, on the scale that I was witnessing really hit me hard, and I didn't have a place for it. Although the teachings and everything, they were really wonderful. They were just enlightening and so on and so forth. But the delivery and the expectation that not the expectation, but the forwardness that I witnessed, these non-natives, they were just handing out and doing all these native practices. I didn't have a place for that. It just made my heart not good. But I went along with it because I'm kind of that way, and I'm kind of just in the shadows, and that's how I was raised, making sure that I didn't stand out too much because of my dreams and so on and so forth. So I just went with the flow. And we did. We brought those teachings back to my island, Nolumbeka, Martha's Vineyard. And we started sassafras with that. But for years, and we went back to AOM a lot, the Art of Mentoring a lot. But for years, I came back and I felt depressed. And I didn't know the reason why. I couldn't put my finger on it. Still, we just continued along the way with these teachings. And during that time, I was ostracized by my tribe. They said I was giving away Wampanoag lore and history and teachings to non-natives. And there was not an understanding that some of the things that I was doing was universal. And I wasn't giving away the stories. I wasn't giving away the history. But still, they didn't understand. And as I said, I felt depressed about this a lot. Until I started doing my own research into cultural appropriation and what that means and how to deal with it, how to make an understanding with the process, and how I was to speak about it, how I was to bring it forward, how could I communicate what I was doing in a context that my people knew where I was coming from as a Native person, giving respect to my ancestors beforehand, before I started anything else, before the day was started. That was the process that I was missing. That was part of the depression that I was feeling because I was not doing it correctly. It was just out of my purview at the time. But ever since then, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been beginning it in a good way. And I was invited to the Nature Connection Mentoring conference 3 years ago to speak about some things, being a Native person. And they didn't have a whole lot of Native people that were involved in these, the mentoring process. It was nearly all white people. So I was able to share a little bit of myself with them and how it feels to, from the beginning, to hear this as a Native person and put it into perspective where I could possibly make all the rest of the people understand that the process is not good. The process is a flawed process. and it actually promotes colonialized mind. So we've been developing processes to break that down to the people that we talk to, the children and the adults, in a way that they can understand that the decolonization process needs to begin here with, when you're sitting around the fire with me every day, where you can recognize these invisible beings called Native Americans now. Take that home, tell your parents that you learned something today about this land and it makes you feel good. And I can do that without feeling depressed anymore. And making sure that my people, I represent my people, my ancestors that passed before me in a good way. And with that, I'm free to do it.
So, I don't know if it's because I've been married to you next week, 20 years, or if you all can see how hard it is for him to say these words at times. And how even hard it was for him to say, and I hope you don't mind me saying it, if you do, you can just beat me up tonight. No, just that he was really angry when we went to that first documentary. I can see his hand trembling, that I know, like he holds things in, right? You hold things in. So it goes really, really deep. And then I'm feeling the words of connection, of like, if we are not connecting from people to people, then of course we are able to follow mechanisms of oppression. That means if we are disconnected. So in other words, if we're going to go do these wonderful practices and we're practicing them only with white people, and we're completely forgetting to mention every single thing, what was here before and what still is here right now, and without including all of us. And by no means should we stop with Native people. We just have a long way to go with Native people because they are so incredible, invisible. But we need to reach out to all of our brothers and sisters. We need to include all of our brothers and sisters from all walks of life, from all colors. People of color have been robbed from their nature connection and from their communities and their villages. They've been coming here involuntarily, to say the least. That's maybe not a discussion for today, but that would be a very good discussion for another day. We can talk about the differences between women and men. We can talk about so many other mechanisms of oppression, but if we do not all come to the table together and we do not have that connection that is based on like true respect, the outcome is not okay. And that is what exactly has been happening. That's what has been happening in outdoor education. People have been, can I say the I word? Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's an N word, well there's an F word, there's an N word, but there's an I word too. So people have been playing Indian for many, many, many years. And all of the practices that we have been borrowing from, that we have been stealing, that we have been inspired by, whatever you want to call them, all of our work in the outdoor education and in nature connection mentoring, no matter how beautiful and connective and how valuable it is my life's work also, I understand. It still is cultural appropriation on account of the power imbalances that exist. I mean, if you find it helpful, I could read you a definition, but I think you can all be grown-ups enough and look that up online if you'd like to. But it basically means cultural theft. And it is very different from an equal cultural exchange because there is no equality. And yes, there are pockets of equality, absolutely. We hope, we strive for equality and equal relationships. And as long as that is the basis, and we can talk about that first, wow, that's a lot of work. So now what do? Now we want to teach a bow drill skill. Now we need to talk about where that came from first. We can't just pull out a bow drill like we used to. That was really convenient, and we could impress a whole lot of people. You know, blow a little spark into a bundle. Everybody's impressed. Everybody wants to do that. I want to be like, you know, cave woman and do that shit. But we can't. I can't. It's not okay. And I'm not here to give you all the answers. I can give you some answers that we found. I can tell you about a lot of other organizations that are seeking for answers, that have come up with all kinds of suggestions. But we can't just go about it the old way anymore. It's too bad to say. And giving up is not an option either because, right? Earth, mama. So then what do? Then we look at, do I really need to bring that? Who is this tradition from? Where does it come from? Oh, this is totally in line with my upbringing of asking questions. It is in line with the mentoring that happened for thousands of years that resulted in that book that John just talked about. So now I need to ask myself all of those questions, like what is my process? What are my assumptions? What are my privileges? What are my power structures that I'm working with? Who am I teaching? Who am I representing? And in the case of the bow drill fire, I'm like, well, I'm lucky. Honey, you do it. Yeah, but it's true. Luckily, I have a whole bunch of kids. I can ask them. They help. But it's hard, and it's going to be a hard conversation, but what's good about it is that we're having it. Mm-hmm. The alternative of stopping, it's not an option, right? We're going to just not connect to nature anymore. We know that. It's probably already too late if we're believing along the lines of what some people say. I go back and forth between the two, but when I look at your beautiful smile, there's still some hope there. Yeah, so what do? Right? So some of the things that we've been looking at, like, is what we're calling, like, the responsibility of right relations is what a lot of us talk about nowadays, right? And especially the responsibilities of right relationships with Native people, because we seek a deep connection with the land, and because they have had, or both, a deep connection with the land. And it wasn't based on me doing this work for one generation, or maybe inspired by our grandmothers. I definitely have one of those grandmothers too, and if it wasn't for her, you know, I wouldn't be the person that I was today. I wouldn't love the birds the way that I love. But it's completely different from thousands of years across a continent of really strong cultural traditions and networks and exchanges on so many different levels. And the refinement that John just illustrated with the technique of bird language that he describes. What was I talking about? I just totally lost it.
Nature Connection 2.0.
Oh yeah, exactly. So we're seeking a connection to the land. The Native people have that connection with the land. We're sitting on their land. Can we just call ourselves immigrants?
Yes.
Would that be a small step? We had a huge discussion in the town of Oak Bluffs. And David said, in my opinion, you all are immigrants. And a shock went through the room. I'm like, really? Like, can we have those shocking conversations then and at least fess up?
I like that one, that's a fun one.
Yeah.
You like that one?
Yeah, because if we all admit that, then all of a sudden our immigration policies that are go away.
That's right.
Right? We could even do politics here, right? And then, of course, you know, the third reason are all the Native teachings. Can we reach out to Native people? Can we teach our children truth English? Yes, we can. This is possible. Can we change our curriculum in such a way that it's enriching, that it's inclusive? One of the things that we have done at Sassafras is we took up lunch. From one day to the next, we've always had Native people, Native kids, Native youth, mostly family members in our programs. And from one day to the next, it's like, why is this number staying so low? Why aren't more people coming, even though, although we officially offer 50% off? Well, 50% for a program, that's still a huge roadblock. So just one day to the next, we said, all program free. And now, 23% in summer camp, Native kids. I'm very proud of that. And the money's coming in. The money is coming in from funders. People are interested. People want to do this work. You know, that was just one step, of course. But with regard to the whole thing of culturally appropriating, we need to have those discussions amongst ourselves. We need to create the affiliations with Native people where you are. You need to do your best, if you haven't done so already, to find them. And another thing that we started doing is being really committed to not only inviting Native people on staff, but also more women on staff and also more people of color on staff. And all of a sudden a very strange thing happened. And now my entire summer camp staff for this summer is Native people and people of color, with the exception of one person. So that makes me think about, be willing to step down. Maybe somebody else will come along and take my job. You know, maybe this was a placeholder function that I filled for a while, and now go ahead and invite the next woman of color to take my role. And it also made me think about, like, so how are we teaching that bow drill, right? And how does it feel differently if it comes from a person of color? It feels very different if it comes from a Native person. So it's not to say that this is the end result for everyone and this is the answer for all people. But to me, when a person of color can teach that and say, yeah, we had certain traditions similar to these way back when, and I really lost track of them because, you know, some dark shit happened in the meantime on the ship that I'm not going to go into. But if we can begin to name that stuff, and we can be real and we can fess up about it, that to me is the beginning of repair work. Why is that clock going so fast all of a sudden? I was just wondering, you know, in addition to other things that we have been finding very, very helpful for repair, that you all would like to speak to, because I know that you're involved in a bunch of initiatives. And if you could maybe each of you briefly talk about, like, the projects you're involved with and how you find reparations can happen, and how people can support Native causes, how people can donate land, pay tax, to Native people, all of those ideas.
Go ahead, David.
Each?
Yep, you start.
Okay. So you mentioned land. We're talking about the fact that we're inside a colonized system, and we want to address the work of decolonization. There's a phrase out there which you may be familiar with by a couple of scholars, Tuck and Yang. Decolonization is not a metaphor. Right? You've heard that? What we're talking about here right now is mostly metaphorical. We're trying to deconstruct some of this stuff, but it actually is about the land. That's what colonization is, settler colonization. And if you don't talk about the land, you're missing the elephant in the room. Right? So we all have to be, we're physical beings. We're other things too, but we're physical. And we all have to be in a place at one time. And when we recognize the fact that we are in a place, we are responsible to that place. And this is the essence of indigeneity, the concept of indigeneity. It's a dualism. You have people, and look it up in the dictionary, the original people of a place. We tend to focus on the people, the indigenous people, whether they're from Finland, or they're from Newfoundland, or they're from California. We're looking at the people. You're missing half the equation. It's where they're from too. And you put those two together and they're the same thing. People and land. The people are the land. The land are the people. When I introduce myself in the Abenaki language, and I'm just in kindergarten, I'm not fluent, but there's a lot of wisdom inside that language. When I introduce myself, I say, I am not saying I'm from Brattleboro. I'm saying I am Brattleboro. This is in the language. This is how you see yourself in place. And it's all about what's going on right now, the relationship. It's a language of verbs. It's a language of process. English is a language of nouns. We objectify. The Abenaki language, we look at relationships. It's how we talk about everything. The nouns are made out of the verbs. The verb comes first. Things are not read. They are being read. They could be something else next week. Right? It's not the be-all and end-all. That's the relationship in this place, in the moment. And so we have to talk about land. Indigenous people are everywhere. They all come from a particular place. Their culture is unique to them. Where did that culture come from? Think about it. We're all human. We have commonalities as humans. Human nature, we call it. Or, that's a weird word. Their culture comes from the place they live in. Where else could it come from? That's all they know. That's their place. Their culture comes out of that land. So if you don't acknowledge those people in the places where you are doing your practice, it doesn't belong there. And you need to do it the way the people there do it. Because they know that place best. They figured it out. The bow drill, whatever it is. If you want to make cordage from a plant, you're going to use a different plant depending on where you are, right? If you're here in the Connecticut River Valley, you need to turn toward the ancient wisdom of the Abenaki people, the Pecumtuck people, the Nipmuc people. You're going to turn to Wigabii. You're going to go to the inner bark of the basswood tree. You're going to go to the milkweed. You're going to turn toward dogbane. How do you know that? Somebody figured that out a long time ago. You owe them that. You don't just get to take that. It's not a la carte. You don't help yourself. I like this. I don't like that. I'll take this. Thank you very much. It doesn't work that way. That's disrespectful. There are people who have lived and died here for thousands and thousands of years that figured that out. And they're still here. Don't turn around. They're still here. Ancestors are still here. We are our ancestors. We are the ancestors of those who will come. This is just a matter of being in community, respect. Culture is place specific. You need to pay attention to that. There are a lot of commonalities, there's a lot of overlaps, there's patterns everywhere, wherever you go in the world. John was talking about this. People know bird language here, they know bird language there, different birds. But there's patterns. But you need to know the place, and you need to bake that into the work that you're doing. And the people who know that place the best and who figured it out first are the indigenous people of that place. Find them, talk to them. If you don't, I don't know, I just can't countenance that idea. That's cheating. And it's appropriation, yeah. How do you do that, though? How do you find those people? That's hard. It really is hard. How do you access that community? There is a great deal of, there's a lot of walls, there's a lot of mistrust. It's understood why that is, you know. Why you come to me asking me these questions? Why should I give you anything? Everything's been taken already. Leave me alone. That's what most Native people want. Leave me alone. However, we're all here together, so we got to figure it out. And it's hard work. But I just want to say, culture is place specific, and it's a matter of respect as a human being. All those that came before and those that came after. You don't just get to choose.
I don't know about you, my mind is racing and so many thoughts that I'm wondering what I could say. I pretty much talked out. What comes to mind is I have to bring it back to my own personal experience. Born and raised on the banks of the Connecticut River, how did my love for nature come to me? I can't explain. It was in me. And I think that with connect with John and what he was saying about the birds. I grew up with birds, very young age, and you've all spent a lot of time out in the woods and in what you would call nature. I think one of the things, and it ties in with cultural appropriation as well, is being quiet. You don't have to ask questions. You don't have to talk to fill up space and clutter the quiet with your voices. You just wait. And first of all, it finds you. And in the silence, for me, that has kept me balanced my entire life. I hear things. I wonder about things. I think about things. But in the silence. And I think that in terms of being around Native people, peppering them with questions about, sustainability and how did you all do this, is kind of counterproductive. When someone wants to tell you, and when you are ready, that's the thing that is there. If you're not ready, the person's not going to tell you. Like Rich says also, so much has been taken away. Why should I give it to you if you aren't really going to take it in? So cultural appropriation is a really difficult thing. My advice would be to just be quiet listen, observe. Don't feel you need to talk or ask questions. Beyond that, I'm like everybody here, I guess. I'm an activist. I do things. I think I found the right vehicle, the right way to do things. And you mentioned a project, so I'll wind up with a project that we are working on and that maybe you could help us with, the Nolumbeka project. And it'll be on the website at some point. But what we have, what we were thinking about this concept of 2020. You all heard about 1620, and of course, pretty soon it's going to be 2020. And down around the coast, around Plymouth, there's all kinds of hoopla going on about marketing and pilgrims and Plymouth Rock and the Mayflower and Miles Standish and all those people. And so what those of us in the valley here were saying, wait a second, talk about colonization, yeah, 1620, thank you very much. What happened here? So I always use the image of Massasoit apparently welcoming the pilgrims and helping them survive, and his son Metacom, King Philip, doing everything he could do to drive him back into the ocean. So the impact of that arrival in 1620 was felt right here. We talked about the massacre that occurred. So what we have come up with at the in the Nolumbeka project is to say, okay, to use a phrase that Lisa Brooks uses is recovering indigenous voices. Yeah, so all those colonials happened, and it happened out on the coast, but it had a major impact on indigenous people here. So let's open up this 2020 thing to Native people in our river valley. So we have gotten, how would I say it? People have accepted to participate, Native people. So we're going to start basically a river journey, starting at Dartmouth College and with the Native American Studies program there. And we're going to do teach-ins. Teach-ins, that's a kind of a phrase we all coined in the 60s, I think. And so we're going to move our way down the river all summer, starting in March at Dartmouth, and we'll come down to Brattleboro, probably canoe or kayak and walk to Northfield. Northfield will go in August to the Pocumtuck Homelands Festival, which I hope you all know about, but if you don't, it's right on the site, facing the massacre site. And we have perhaps 8 or 9 tribal representatives there, bringing their music and stories and language to that. That's the first weekend in August, but we will bring our Mishun, which is the dugout canoe, and everyone else is welcome in kayak canoeing coming down to the festival, 2-day festival. Then further on, we'll walk from Wissahickon, Canada Hill, that we saved from a Walmart development around 15 years ago. A 10,000-year-old village site, which was going to be bulldozed, and Walmart was going to be looking down on the village of Turner's Falls, to coin a use the phrase. We'll go to Deerfield. From Deerfield, we have programs lined up in Holyoke and Springfield, and we'll wind up at the Connecticut River Museum in Essex. So this is coming up, and we could really use, first of all, some help, but also it'd be a fantastic occasion. We have primarily the Abenaki people are coming to these teach-ins to do the teaching. We will just be finding the way to take care of logistics and funding. And so Indigenous people all the way down the river will be doing and sharing the life ways, we hope, and being greeted with tremendous respect. So we're trying to recover those ways. This is what we do. This is what I do. Other than when I'm not out in the woods listening to the birds, which is what I love to do as well, converse. I have a little Phoebe living on my front porch who keeps an eye on me when I go out the front door, and she knows and I know what she's doing, and she's tolerating me going by her nest. But you know, you're tuned into those kinds of things, and when you have that connection, that's when you're really into it. And how do you teach that to kids, or how do you know, it has to come from within, it has to come from quiet observation, it has to come from listening and not making a lot of noise. So anyway, I wanted to put that out there, that we're doing what we can to recover these indigenous voices. Rich will be part of it. The other Abenaki up and down the valley will be part of it. And Nehantic people will be part of the Essex Museum teach-in down there. So keep an eye out, and on the Nolumbeka project media coverage, whatever we have, you'll see it. You'll hear about us too. So I'm talked out. It's not my role to ask you if you have questions. I'm sure that if you do, we're all ears. So thank you.
Well, I like what Rich said earlier, that this is the beginning of a very long conversation. And I get the feeling that we're not talking about a few hours or even a few weeks, but maybe decades of figuring things out. And I just know I'm down for the conversation, and really want to support in any way that I can to help this conversation keep going and growing. Not just here, but also where I live now and in the different places that I work. I thank everybody for being here tonight. And yeah, grateful for you three. Wonderful to meet you two tonight and see you again. I'm really happy to be part of this. Thank you, Saskia, too.
And I'll say that there are a couple of things, a couple of projects here that are Native, women Native, David Vanderhoek, young woman of color in the Baltimore area. So if you're interested in any of these projects, if you're interested in donating anything or supporting otherwise by helping spread the word, that would be very, very much appreciated. Even if you could spare just a tiny little bit, that will maybe help set the balance just for this evening off a little bit. And other than that,
Wait, before you turn it over, we're going to be, the three of us, plus Amy Hyatt and a number of others, will be at Roe, and as far as we understand... Yeah, did you not know? We're going to Roe. We're going to be doing a bird language intensive at Roe, starting tomorrow, no, Friday.
yes.
And there's
The
room.
nuke plant is closed now.
There's room, please come or tell people. We're going to have a good time. And you'll be jealous if you hear about it afterwards. You'll be like, oh, I should have gone. We're going to have a really good time.
We're going to have an amazing time. We're going to be talking about the birds and more about the birds. We're going to talk about decolonizing. We're going to bother each other. It's going to be fun. Yes.
One second.
David?
Yeah.
You done?
I just want to say that I'd like you to encourage you to take these words and connect them to yourself and pass them on, and wherever you are, start and start the process of that recognition of the people who are here before you in any way that you possibly can. Even doing the research yourself, looking up, okay, this is where I am on the map and who was here. And then pass that on to some of the kids or some of your parents or whatever. Just give it away to somebody, because the mainstream that's out there still doesn't have a clue. and think that it's okay when they're, walking in their own shoes and not thinking about anybody else. But just try on somebody else's shoes. Try on a native person's shoes and see how that feels within yourself. And hopefully that'll give you a little bit more of a hand on the steering wheel to make some recognition for the people who are here, who gave their lives so that you could be here.
Thank you. Thank all of you. I feel like jumping up and down and running around the building and crying and getting to work. And there's just basically one thing that I wanted to share, which I don't even think you know about because it was a phone call that I got this afternoon. And I know that for me, this work is so infused in my life, and I'm always thinking about what can I do and how can I act. And I think probably a lot of us are thinking about that right now too. We're going home. I want to acknowledge that we're on decolonized time, 15 minutes over, and that's just going to be what it is. Thank you for being in the flow. So please stay with this process. Please buy these books out here and read them, and come to these workshops. Engage with the partner organizations and what they're offering who are represented here, and get to work in your own communities too. I also want to say one more thank you, which is to Larry Buell, who's really modeling what it can be like to take a back seat as a way of being a supportive ally. He's working behind the scenes all the time here at Greenfield Community College and doing what my friend Rowan White, who's Haudenosaunee, calls rematriation, returning land to Nipmuc people locally here. And he worked really hard to make this event happen. So thank you so much, Larry.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I also want to thank you, Anthony, for all your hard work, and for all of you who've worked hard. And there's just this one exciting thing, which is that all of these projects are important and they're all priorities, and one of them is on a really urgent time frame right now. And to name that, this oppression is all bound up together. The oppression of the earth, the oppression of people, all the different types of people, all the different types of work that we're doing, and so is our liberation. And so this is something that needs attention immediately. This is our friend Tia Wells' project. She's a woman of color who lives in urban Baltimore, and she's dove right into decolonization and nature connection work, and is now working round the clock, in addition to her full-time job as a nurse, to support her young family, working without pay to start a nature connection organization in downtown Baltimore. And they have just been given the opportunity to buy this land, which will save a huge a huge wild space from being developed. They have 10 days to raise $40,000 more, or it will be sold to developers. And the phone call I got today was from a private donor who said, we went and did a stretch, and we're scrambling to get money together, and we want to offer a matching grant of a minimum of $10,000. And we need you all to step up and contribute what is a stretch for you. And this donor was like, Trevonna, I need you to tell those people that tonight, which is a total stretch for me to be like, I'm asking them for money. But I always tell people in my programs we need to unsettle the settlers if we're going to decolonize. So I'm feeling unsettled about this, and this donor asked me to ask you if any of you are willing to contribute within the next 10 days an amount that's a stretch for you to support this work, to make this project happen. It's necessary. And if this donor said, ask them to have a show of hands if they're willing to donate. So I want to ask you for a show of hands. Are you willing to give to this project? Yes, thank you. Oh, I feel really good. So please, my booth is the Wildwood Path. I'm just gonna write donations on one of those sign-up sheets. Please write your name and email, and we'll follow up with you about how to do that. I'll send you the link, and we'll make it happen. So thank you for that. And I also wanted just to invite you to one more event, which is a Healing the Wounds of Turtle Island ceremony in Maine this summer, which is a Native-led 5-day ritual and opportunity to continue this decolonization work. So I want to mention that so that I don't forget, and if you're wanting to know more about that, please contact me. And we could go on all night. I'm sure that all of us have our own exciting ideas about what we can do to take decolonization forward in our work and in our lives, and I look forward to hearing about those. And right now, I look forward to hearing whatever closing words are coming from David or anyone who's speaking next. So, thank you.
Well, I really want to thank, I want to thank my fellow panel members, David, Rich, John, and especially want to thank my wife Saskia, who had a birthday yesterday. For just pushing me to do this work and to hang in there, even when it was really, really hard and almost losing my house and land, just to keep going, because this effort is just not for me. It's for the next generation. And I believe that, all of you who touch the younger generation, whether it's through programs or through family and so on, you've got a responsibility. And I truly believe that you're ready to take a little more on. So, with that, I ask the ancestors to give you a little boost. Look over your shoulder sometime when you have a doubt, because they're there with you. And they'll help. Sometimes you gotta ask. So, go home with a little piece of knowledge that you didn't have when you came. Don't be afraid to share it. Thanks again for all your words and your love that you gave tonight. And sorry we didn't have time to talk to each and every one of you and have your thoughts here. We'll do that next time.
Rich, want to take us out? Closing something?
I'll just say uliuni, kitsi uliuni, thank you very much. Uli Bamkani, safe travels. And thank you for joining us here. And get in touch with your locals. It'll be good. Yeah. Yeah.
It'll be a little hard, but it'll be good.
Here are little pieces with the tears.
I'm gonna get the sheet.